Ladies and gentlemen, with great sadness, we're here discussing the tournament we so love in the world, in world cricket, the IPL. Unfortunately, due to circumstances out of everyone's control, very unfortunate circumstances, and we send our prayers to all those in India battling with the COVID-19 pandemic. The IPL has been suspended, but we've got our good friends here, Ben Jones from CricViz and Matt Roller from ESPN Cricinfo, as well as my co-host Tymal Mills. And many of you will remember at the beginning of the season, we made some bold predictions. We gave our insight on each individual team. And today we're here to break it down for you, taking a look back, reflecting on what the IPL has been. And this was sort of the halfway stage. So seeing how our predictions did, I could tell you mine didn't do really well. But let's get straight into the show. Tymal, my co-host, how are you doing, mate? Great to see you after a while. First of all, tell me about the IPL. What was your thoughts up to it? And, how unfortunate is the circumstances right now?
Yeah, look, obviously it's disappointing. It's sad for everybody involved. You have to remember that IPL is such a big tournament. It's so much bigger than even the players and the coaches. It pays mortgages. It pays, puts food on the table for, thousands and thousands of families, ground staff, TV production crew, catering, hotel staff. It's so much bigger than the playing 11 and the coaching staff and the commentators. So it's obviously it was a decision that I'm sure wasn't made lightly, but I'm sure we've all seen on the news, and I know some people out in India, and you speak to people, it is a very bad situation out there at the moment, even worse than what you see on television and a lot of parts. So I think the right decision was made. Obviously, the news was dropping that quite a lot of cases were starting to come up within the bubble, and you'd assume that was only going to increase. It was very unlikely that those would be isolated incidents that would just disappear. So the right decisions were made, and now obviously has been well documented how guys are getting home. I know most of the English guys have already managed to get home, and Australians and New Zealanders are really struggling, or they might just get a nice holiday in the Maldives for a little while until they can get back. But obviously very sad, but it was a great tournament to watch whilst it was going on, wasn't it? I was doing quite a bit of commentary, and there were some really entertaining games, a lot of high scores, some young stars kind of making a name for themselves. So yeah, lots to look back on, but unfortunately not a full tournament to get under the belt.
Matt, how are you, man? Great to have you back on the show, as we said before. I know by seeing, your Twitter and your great articles on Cricinfo as well, how invested you were into the tournament. How big of a blow do you think it is that we're unable to finish?
Yeah, it's a massive shame, but as Tymal says, I think definitely the right decision. I think there was a sort of disconnect going on in the last week between sort of trying to enjoy the cricketing spectacle, but equally, seeing on my Twitter timeline people crying out for help. And I have a lot of colleagues in India, and it was quite clear that the situation was getting worse at a quick pace. So I think it had to be done. As for the cricket itself, yeah, loved it as always. Always get into the habit of game start at 3 o'clock over here. So, you're very much ready to settle in the late afternoon and watch them and listen to Tymal on comms. It was sort of just coming into its own at the point when equally you could tell that it was going to grind to a halt pretty soon.
Thank you so much for that. Ben Jones, my favorite man. I can't wait to get to your predictions, Ben. But great to have you back on the show. And Matt mentioned something there in terms of the COVID relief. I want to really credit and, give a special mention to all those who would have donated to the cause. We saw Pat Cummins, Brett Lee, so many others, Rajasthan, so many of the franchises. So I think, really it's going to a great cause, and I'm really hoping that things can recover as soon as possible in terms of India and their situation. But Ben, I know obviously from a statistical point of view, it's a tournament that you really love to do and love to watch. How saddening is it that, we aren't able to continue?
Well, I mean, you don't want to get too sad about the cricket side of things, because as you say, there is that much broader perspective that you do have to it's rarely far from the front of your mind. And yeah, so I'd echo what Matt said as well in terms of having colleagues out in India, and I don't have too many friends out there at the moment. They've managed to kind of make their way back, or make their way back to the UK or Australia. But for those that are out there, it's hard to kind of shake that off. And so yeah, the cricketing side of things by the end of it for me was kind of taking quite a significant back seat. So to be honest, by the end of it, it was more a bit of a relief of like, okay, we haven't got to quite invest in it. But there is, as as you're kind of alluding to, there is still a lot to kind of dissect and go through, and there's still lots to analyze. And so it's not been, we still got basically half of a group stage, slightly more than half of a group stage. That's a lot of T20 cricket. Most of these sides have played 7 or 8 games, and so there is a lot to take away from it. I mean, the fact that so much of it was quite unexpected, and the fact that I think a lot of our predictions were, as you say, kind of quite far from the mark. I think they would have probably evened out over the coming weeks, which is probably one maybe kind of slight downside of it not continuing as a tournament. I think Sunrisers might have come back into it, and CSK might have slipped back down, and we might have looked like less of a bunch of mugs. But as it is, we kind of have to take it at face value and to hold our hands up.
Well, Ben, Sunrisers would have needed a miracle to fulfill your predictions, but I'm going to get to that.
Well, Matt thought they were going to win the whole thing. So.
Well, let's guys, I'm glad you guys brought that up, because as you said, Ben, we put it perfectly. There's so much to break down. We had some really eye-catching, some fantastic cricket over those weeks, really, to see the young talent coming through, not just from an Indian perspective, but overseas talents like a Riley Meredith, for example, or, a lot of younger guys that many may not know. We saw Marco Jansen, in the beginning of the tournament for the Mumbai Indians. So definitely a lot of young talent, which I was really impressed by. Let's get straight into it. We each, before the tournament, would have selected one team, and we had our keys to victory for them. So let's go straight into it. In terms of Matt, you had Rajasthan Royals as your team. Your keys to victory were the overseas quicks in terms of their fitness. We saw that didn't go too well in terms of Jofra Archer being unavailable. Jos Buttler and Ben Stokes and their role clarity was the next one. And I was pretty impressed, losing Ben Stokes early in the tournament. Rajasthan sort of still coming back well in terms of Jos Buttler riding his form. He scored 100 recently. Sanju Samson as well. We mentioned him being more responsible with that role of captaincy. In terms of that specific point on the Buttler-Stokes role clarity, we didn't see much of Stokes, but did you sort of see that, in the initial phase of the tournament?
Well, it would have been really interesting to see how it would have played out, because obviously Stokes, had played the first game of the tournament, got injured, taking a catch off Chris Gale, I think it was, in a deep. Had one innings, got a third bowler, and then was straight back to the UK pretty much, which then had the knock-on effect of Buttler shifting up. Butler's form was pretty sketchy, to be honest, for the first 5 or 6 games, but then played one of the great T20 innings, I thought, against Sunrisers, getting his first T20 100 eventually. When, I think he was something like 35 or 33, really grinding it out. They really attacked him early with Rashid Khan. They bowled all 4 of Rashid Khan's overs in, I think, the first 11 or 12. And then Buttler really put his foot down in the second half and got something like 90 off his last 30. Which, again, it's really interesting that he started in the middle order and moved up, and sort of indicated the fact he was opening midway through. But very difficult to know how that would have played out otherwise, to be honest. And you mentioned the point about the fast bowler's fitness and Archer's unavailability, and the fact that Stokes had to go home after 1 game. To be honest, I think 3 wins and 4 losses was a pretty good return from Rajasthan, because they stayed in playoff contention despite the fact that they lost those 2 huge overseas players that, as I said before the tournament, they're so reliant on those 2. So to be without them and to have still been in playoff contention, I was pretty surprised by.
I fully agree. It was an excellent performance by them. Tymal, I'm going to come to you now in terms of the Chennai Super Kings. I must say, I think the Chennai Super Kings surprised every person, the way they played. And I personally believe it's up to one man. They made a very crucial addition of Moeen Ali. I know you guys will get very excited by that name being English, but I think Moeen Ali was outstanding. The stats speak for himself in terms of his contribution with the ball and bat. You, Tymal, said, how would they adapt playing away from their home ground? And Sam Curran, we saw him come on in sort of the back end of the tournament recently, taking 3 wickets in the last game. How impressed were you with your fellow countryman, Tymal, Sam Curran, with the ball? And bat, sorry. Muted.
I'm still not figuring out Zoom. Him and Moeen Ali obviously played a huge role. They played all the games bar 1. I think Moeen sat out a game with a tight hammy, but look, they had really, really important roles to play for their side. We knew the huge role that Sam Curran had for CSK, as he has for the last year or so, with bat and ball, kind of sliding up and down the order, and also more often than not bowling all 4 of his overs. He's obviously got the trust of MS Dhoni. So look, he was really impressive for me. He's sixth on the leading wicket takers chart. He took 9 wickets, an economy rate of 8.6. So bowling in the power play as he often does, that's really impressive. And Moeen Ali obviously coming in at the top of the order, number 3, playing some really eye-catching knocks. Obviously, a lot of talk about what his role is for England. Often Sam Curran's probably the person keeping him out of the England side at batting 7 and the 5th, 6th bowler. But Moeen Ali was very impressive, and we all, myself included, probably wrote them off a bit too early in terms of could they play on the truer pitches and not on the raging turners that we saw in Chennai. Those pitches did turn. They definitely did. Those group stage matches that we watched. And look, Faf du Plessis, third on the run scoring charts at number 3 with at 320 runs from his completed innings in the IPL so far. So that he was obviously played a huge role at the top of the order with Gaikwad, and they just had consistency. They were pretty consistent all throughout. They weren't patchy. They weren't kind of hit and miss. The experience that they had, that gets spoken about a lot, probably negatively. Are they too experienced, too old? The experience that they had was at the halfway mark proving to be gold.
Spot on. And obviously your other keys were, you just touched on it slightly in terms of kind of senior players, blend with the youth. As you mentioned, we saw Ruturaj Gaikwad, and then obviously the seamers must in terms of, you said the seamers must control and to compensate for the lack of express pace. And towards the end, we did see, as you said, Sam Curran, Deepak Chahar was impressive in spurts as well. Ben, your team was the Sunrisers Hyderabad, and boy, it was some interesting cricket from their point of view. We saw really a roller coaster ride. We saw the dropping of the captain, David Warner. Before I even get to your keys to victory, Ben, I'm going to put you in the hot seat. Did you feel like that was the right move? Dropping David Warner out of the captaincy and even out of the team?
Well, I think what's quite, I will answer your question, but first, I think it's quite funny that having had to make that huge call, that obviously that really politically difficult call is going to have huge fallout for them, the tournament's then immediately cancelled. So if they'd have waited for one more game, they'd have got away with being like, oh, we were about to drop Warner, we haven't got to worry about that. They would have got away with it. To be honest, I think it was the wrong call. I do think it was the wrong call, because he was out of nick, but probably only about as out of nick as Butler was before he went and smacked 100. And he is David Warner. He carries all of that experience and all of that kind of weight of history with him. I think he does have the identity of Sunrisers. I know it's quite a random thing, but like he kind of controls that side to quite a strong degree. And whilst there are obviously so many voices there above him now with Bayliss and Moody and Murali and Lakshman, there are all these kind of big personalities. He is still, he's the bull. He still has that aura about him. And I think I would want to have given them the opportunity to have another mega auction cycle with him as the 100% backed Mr. Sunrisers, David Warner. He's the captain. He runs the show. Whereas now it's quite difficult to say we've just dropped our skipper, to throw him into another mega auction cycle, to say we're definitely going to retain you, we're going to pay you all this money. I think it suddenly becomes quite a certainly a more difficult situation than it was a week ago, particularly because you've got Kane Williamson there, who's just little goody two shoes. Everyone loves him. He's the exact opposite of Warner, so he's such an obvious kind of alternative candidate that if they did say that's our next 3 years, that's our next big auction cycle, there is you've got a guy there who they can immediately back. They haven't got to give it to a kid or the Shreyas Iyer type. They can just go with proven, experienced, almost World Cup winning captain. So yeah, I think they've created a problem for themselves, but I don't envy it. He was scratchy for 2 weeks, if not longer.
Yeah, and as you said, it was kind of surprising because David Warner has been the man for them in the past years. Before I get to your keys, Ben, I just want to ask Matt quickly. Matt, in terms of the David Warner thing, an alternate perspective, what did you think of on that whole situation?
Yeah, I generally agree. I mean, it's quite interesting sort of charting how much Warner has changed. If you think about the batsman that initially burst onto the scene 10 years ago, who was all about attacking intent, played a shot of ball, came into the test side and was scoring at a strike rate of the best part of 100 in red ball cricket. To the guy that we saw in this IPL, where his strike rate was about 110, I think, across the competition. And to be honest, a lot of that wasn't actually for want of trying. Like in that innings of 57, where he thought about a run of ball, he was swinging himself off his feet at times, sort of desperate to try and get the ball away, but just really couldn't pierce the infield. I agree with what Ben said. There's probably a lot of internal politics within the franchise. I think it's quite an unusual situation that they had Tom Moody as coach, got rid of him as coach and brought in Trevor Bayliss, and then brought Moody back above Bayliss as director of cricket. That's a very strange situation, and one that you wouldn't see in most sports, I don't think. So that's a unique spot. I think the big question now, assuming we get a mega auction, obviously we don't know what the cycle looks like, with not knowing with the second half of this competition when it will be played, whether it will be finished, all that sort of thing. But the interesting one is that generally I think teams have only been able to retain 2 overseas players. I would imagine that Sunrisers are 100% certain to retain Rashid Khan for a mega auction, and that now they'll probably retain Williamson as well ahead of Warner, and that would be a very interesting ending to one of the sort of, if you think about Sunrisers, as Ben said, he's so intertwined with their identity as a franchise that it's quite difficult to imagine them without him. But yeah, I mean, they had a stinking season, didn't they? Let's be honest. I think they used 20 odd players. They had all sorts of injuries. Bhuvi was injured, Natarajan was injured, Sandeep was injured, Samad was injured, which isn't exactly a great start. And then that middle order, they kept on changing things around, and it just didn't click at all. We thought stability would probably be the key for them, and they didn't have any of it. So yeah, not entirely surprised. I mean, I thought they would do really well. I took them to finish top of the league stage, but yeah, just a unmitigated disaster, really.
You summed it up well. Ben, I'm just going to refresh the viewers of your keys to victory. You said Bhuvaneshwar staying fit. We just heard that was not the case. Abdul Samad, you had him picked to develop sort of in that role, that low order role, even with his bowling as well. Mohammad Nabi returning as a threat to the left-handed batsman. We saw him sort of feature more. Surprisingly to me, I thought Jason Holder would have been that man. And then slow pitches in Chennai, helping their lack of pace. What for you, sum it up all for me, Ben, what for you was the problem overall with Sunrisers?
I think I basically everything went wrong. Every single thing that could have gone wrong went wrong. The Chennai pitches didn't suit them. It basically seemed to exaggerate a lack of pace. Mm-hmm. That actually they were, Sandeep and Siddharth Kaul and even Bhuvi to an extent were just kind of plonking on a length, and it was just sitting. There was nothing in the pitches, and so you needed that extra pace to go through. I thought it would complement them and allow them to bowl the cutters and stuff, but that didn't really come through. They never nailed their overseas balance, not once across the tournament. They started out with obviously Rashid's a lock, but as you say, they kind of had Nabi in there as an all-rounder occasionally. It started with Bairstow and Warner, then moved to Bairstow, Warner and Williamson, and then by the end were Bairstow and Williamson. And that's fine, you can change things up, that's okay, but it didn't speak to a side that knew what they were trying to do. And they were just shocked, I think, by quite how bad that Indian middle order did end up being. And I think we did speak about it in the podcast, that it's an obvious weakness, and it has been for years. And that was partly why I was excited about Samad. And I don't think he played badly. I think he had a couple of injuries, or had an injury that meant he missed the odd game. And I think he was dropped, or kind of maybe not brought back in as quickly as he could have been for one match. So there's kind of mitigating factors, but he didn't kick on quite as much as I wanted / expected him to. The handling of Manish Pandey was a bit odd. That was what Warner kicked off about in the press conference, where Manish was doing fine, like not spectacularly. He's not a spectacular player, but he was doing well, and he was dropped. And Warner said, no, this isn't really on. The guys he's bringing in were like Kedar Jadhav, who's one of the slowest scoring batsmen in the IPL for the last 3 years. And it's Vijay Shankar. It's like they're not match winners. You're not, it's not backing some talented kids. You're bringing in similar players of a similar standard who are not in a team for a reason. So I think there was quite a lot of muddled selection. We said that they needed to keep Bhuvi fit. They didn't. He was sore quite a lot of the tournament and was coming in and out and didn't look 100% fit when he did play. And although he did look quite effective when he did. And then they just never. I know it sounds really obvious. When a team gets on a roll like they were, when they got to that place where they'd lost like 3, 4, 5 consecutive matches, you could just see them as soon as Bairstow gets out. Like, we've got nothing now. The middle order is gone. That we're all out of form or out of nick. We're coming in and out of the side. So you just ended up with a situation where they were so reliant on Rashid, as they always are, to take wickets. But if you set them 140, they weren't chasing it, because it was all on Bairstow. They're a mess, and I don't really know why. And it's going to take me 5,000 words in a couple of weeks to decide. So Yeah, cancel the rest of the tournament and just you can all read that. that could
we'll look forward to it on Twitter, man. We'll check you out for sure. Just quickly, my keys to victory for the Delhi Capitals, who I think I was the closest because these guys looked like they were going to win the tournament. Can Delhi fill the Shreyas Iyer void? The Delhi Capitals pace attack needs to perform. The overseas batsmen need to step up, and Akshar Patel coming back into the team. Oh, I have to give myself some credit there, man. Those look pretty solid. But I must say, Avesh Khan was a revelation. 14 wickets for Delhi. Even when Kaigiso Rabada wasn't, at his full best, Avesh Khan really stepped up. The entire Delhi team, whoever they brought in, just touched the goal. Ishant Sharma, really balanced squad. And I thought Shreyas Iyer would have really affected them. And Rishabh Pant showed in terms of his batting. Steve Smith coming up the order, batting at 3. Just a flexible team. The fact that Marcus Stoinis, in my opinion, didn't even really play to his true potential, didn't get much opportunity. Sherman Hetmeyer as well, just the one innings where he really batted the deliveries. I just think that team is a really strong unit. And I think this season may have done them some injustice in terms of not being able to finish it, because I think they had a really good chance to go on and win this one. Guys, let's go to your predictions now. Some very interesting ones, of course, which I want to get into. So Tymal, I'll start with the winners first. Most of us, I should say, had the Mumbai Indians to win. At this stage, 7 matches, the Mumbai Indians were in 4th place. I'm just going to refresh our viewers on who had Mumbai. So Matt had Sunrisers, which I'm going to ask him about. Ben, myself, and Tymal Mills all had the Mumbai Indians to win the tournament. So Tymal, tell me, Mumbai in 4th, a little up and down. That Chennai leg didn't go so well for them. Do you think they had what it took to go all the way and win, having seen what you did in the first 7 matches?
Yeah, they weren't as dominant as everybody expected, but I think it's tough when before the tournament starts, you look at the teams. In Mumbai, they had the strongest team. They've got the pedigree, so you have to predict them to win. It's very rare that professional sport works like that the best team just goes out there. Obviously, they don't win. A team's never going to just go out there and win every game. But they were well placed. They're 4 points behind Delhi at the top of the table with a game in hand. So in theory, they'd catch up in no time. Obviously, still got to play each other again. They just didn't quite fire as much as what you'd expect. We'll get on to like Trent Bolt, who I obviously predicted to be the leading wicket taker. He wasn't quite as effective in the power play as he has been recently. The swing not quite there for him in the early part of the tournament. But I'm sure they wouldn't have been disappointed. There wouldn't have been panic stations, I don't think. They were very well placed, obviously, to finish in the top 4 if they would have continued how they were going. And then once you get into the knockout stages at the back end of the tournament, that's when you would really fancy Mumbai in a shootout against any team, really, wouldn't you? So maybe not quite as dominant as what we expected, but still far from a disaster or a bad first opening half to a tournament.
And we just saw that massive performance against the Chennai Super Kings. I'm going to stick on your predictions, Tymal. Your bottom place team, the Chennai Super Kings, currently in the top 4. Talk to me about that one. How much did you mentioned it before? How much did it surprise you? And what, I don't think they would have finished in the bottom, Tymal.
No, it doesn't look that way. Look, I obviously reviewed CSK. I looked through their squad, what their strengths are, their weaknesses are, and they just seemed like their whole squad was shaped up to play in Chennai on turning pitches. And if they weren't, I thought they would struggle. And I think they got away a little bit with their pace bowling. Their pace bowlers were expensive throughout the whole tournament. I'm sure Lungi Ngidi may not have played much more after his last performance. I think you'd have seen Jason Behrendorff come in to the side. So they were a little bit weaker there. Deepak Chahar took wickets. Shardul Thakur was a bit expensive. So they weren't blowing teams away with the ball, but with the bat, they were very strong. Faf du Plessis, as I spoke about at the moment, the 3rd leading run scorer. Gaikwad looked really impressive. Sam Curran was doing a job. Moeen Ali was looking impressive at number 3. Their batting was looking strong on these good, true pitches that they were playing on. And that's, in my opinion, what had carried them to joint second in the points table. So, I think I obviously misread them. I underestimated them. I underestimated the experience. But it would have been interesting to see how the tournament would have gone from there on in, because as I said, their pace bowling wasn't quite firing, and their batters and their spinners were getting them out of trouble. So how that would have gone over 14 games, you never know. But yeah, I definitely got them slightly wrong in that regard.
Matt, in terms of you, your pick, Sunrisers Hyderabad to win the tournament and the Punjab Kings to come last. Right now, the Sunrisers obviously were in last and Punjab in that 6th place position. Talk to me about both first, the Sunrisers pick, them being in last position. You touched on it before. And then Punjab, who trying to find that right combination. We saw them bring in David Malan and have had, some problems with KL Rahul's injury. We hope that he gets well soon. Do you think, Sunrisers had the miracle in them to get to the top of the table and win the tournament?
Absolutely not. No, I think they were they were in a rut, and I don't think it was getting any better, as we've touched on. Yeah, I think they would probably have finished 7th or 8th. But yeah, as I say, I think a huge number of things went wrong. Everything that could go wrong went wrong, as Ben said earlier. So yeah, not my final to pick that one. I think Punjab might actually have come bottom. To be fair, I think personally, despite the fact that Puran was having a bad tournament and was clearly out of nick, I think it's a terrible sign to be dropping one of the best T20 batsmen in the world just because he's had 5 or 6 bad games. I think they should have persevered with him and given him a huge amount of rope, given him every game in the tournament, backed him all the way, because I think he's a good enough player that you have to do that. And I think that his ceiling is so much higher than Milan's that they should have persevered with him, even despite that pretty terrible run at the start. And I think the thing I highlighted at the start of the tournament as to why I sort of feared for them was their bowling, and I don't really think they answered that too much. It sort of slightly weirdly took a while to pick Ravi Bishnoi, who I think is a really good bowler and did very well when he got a chance. But in terms of those overseas quicks, obviously, I to be honest, I don't think either Meredith or Richardson did a huge amount wrong early in the tournament. Like I remember that I think that first game Punjab played against Rajasthan, Richardson ended with something like 1 for 55, but it didn't bowl that badly in the context. I think it was just the fact that they were playing on a pitch where 220 was par. But yeah, I think all told, their attack just didn't really have much bite to it, and maybe lacked a little bit of balance as well. And in the batting, yeah, obviously, through all the debate about Rahul's strike rate that inevitably comes up, I think he was going to prove to be a massive loss at the top of the order in the second half of the comp. Now, obviously, it could end up coming back, but there's a whole load of variables as to when the comp is played and who's available and international players and all that sort of thing. So I think, one of those picks probably aged better than the other.
And you mentioned Riley Meredith, man. He brought back serious memories, and it reminds people like us of why guys like Tymal Mills and these with all the raft pace get paid the big bucks. So it was great. He was great to watch for sure, Riley Meredith. Ben, you, similar to Tymal, have Mumbai and Chennai. Mumbai as your first place team and Chennai as your last place. Do you think Mumbai had it in the tank? They were sort of now beginning to peak. Do you think they had it in the tank to go on and win the tournament?
Yeah, definitely. I think they always start slowly. It's kind of classic Mumbai. They take a few games to get going. They always lose their opener. That is their template, and then they grow into the tournament. There were a couple of players that were a bit out of form. I think they were struggling, as Tymal said about Bolt was struggling to just be quite as effective as last year. He's never going to be as good because that was one of the great IPL performances, but he was the shadow of his previous self. But I think he would have probably recovered a little bit of form because he's a quality bowler. And Hardik wasn't quite at his best. Obviously, we saw Polly kind of come incredibly good against Chennai. That was absolutely amazing. But I think if Hardik can come in and kind of find some of that form alongside him, then they are still unstoppable. That's for the same reasons that Tymal said ahead of the tournament. We're saying this is the best side. That hasn't changed. It's 5-6 games in, or 7 games in. There are a couple of bad games, and suddenly they've dropped Kishan, and everything's gone a little bit weird, and they're throwing everything up in the air after playing 2 weeks on dodgy pitches. I think they'd have been fine. I mean, judging by how they went against Chennai, which I think that was the template. It was like high scoring. It was basically like they were back at the Wankhede, and it was we'll just score one more than you. Doesn't matter whether you score 2-2-5, we'll score 2-2-6. That felt like them kind of ready to kick on to the next chapter. So for them, it's a bit unfortunate. And the tournament did come to a halt when it did.
Yeah, my predictions finally were the Mumbai Indians to finish first and the Rajasthan Royals to finish last. And I must say, you touched on it earlier in the show, Matt. Rajasthan, I must give them immense credit with all the injuries, all the people they lost. Jofra Archer, Ben Stokes, they're almost two main players. They had Liam Livingston go back home due to personal reasons. They really held their own well. I think it comes down to Sanju Samson and his responsibility. We're starting to see with the bat. And of course, Joss Butler, who's been the mainstay for them. So I definitely have to give them credit. I don't think they would have finished last, given the way they've been playing. Musa Fizur Rahman was great with the ball. Chris Morris showing that he's worth that big price tag and being able to execute at the death. So I was impressed, definitely. And I'm going to say I'm still going to pick Mumbai to win because you can't pick against the 5-time champions, man. It's just, you can't. And Kyron Pollard and just they showed it, regardless of any situation, you can never count them out. Let's now go, guys, in terms of your predictions for the top run scorer and the top wicket taker. Tymal, you first. Virat Kohli was your pick. We saw Virat Kohli was in the runs, opening the batting, of course, this year, but not to the magnitude that we all expected. And your wicket taker was Trent Boult, who, of course, was taking some crucial wickets for the Mumbai Indians. 8 wickets to his name thus far. Do you believe that those would have sustained, Tymal, in terms of Trent Boult and Kohli?
Yeah, it'd have been a bit of an effort for them both to get to the top, as I predicted. Virat Kohli, he scored 198 runs, top score of 72 not out. So he had that, that big innings, that eye-catching innings, but he was playing second fiddle, wasn't he? Really throughout the whole tournament to either Padikkal or to Maxwell or to De Villiers, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. You can play second fiddle and kind of quietly accumulate behind the scenes, but ultimately that doesn't quite get you to the top where I was predicting him. But he was having a nice tournament. Maybe everybody expects us Virat Kohli, he must be the man, but maybe he was quite happy actually just playing kind of, as I say, the second fiddle to these other guys, and those guys maybe taking more of the headlines. And Trent Boult, he was struggling in comparison to last year, as Ben rightly said. When you have a tournament like you have, you're always going to regress to the mean slightly, and he maybe just went a little bit past that in terms of regression. But he still had 8 wickets in the tournament so far, which put him joint 5th in the leading wicket takers. So he was well placed, but he certainly didn't get off to a flyer and wasn't quite getting that swing. I think the conditions played quite a big part of that. But once you move to the different stadiums, you never know how your fortunes might change. So weren't my worst picks, but maybe but not the best either.
Ben, you said Surya Kumar Yadav and Kagiso Rabada. Now Rabada only being able to take the 8 wickets in the tournament, but Surya Kumar Yadav, I just cannot get this one worked out because every time he batted, he just looked pristine like he usually does, hitting the ball at the middle of the bat, but just unfortunately could not find the runs. What do you think went wrong? And do you think, given the quality of him, he had the ability to actually score the bulk of the runs at the back end of the tournament and become that leading run scorer?
Yeah, similarly to Mumbai more generally, I think he had it in him to kind of come back in. Whether or not he'd have been able to recover the gap to Shikhar at the top of the run scoring chart, maybe not, but I think he would have gone on to have a solid tournament. You are right, though. It's just that classic Surya Kumar thing of I think he made 50 odd in the first game and 30 odd in the second, and you're just he was just to the manner born, just walks in, first ball for 4, sweeping, playing all the shots, just looks so complete. He looks so good when he's on form. You just think, well, yeah, he'll dominate world cricket for the next 5 years, but then he finds a way to get out. And I think he partly suffered because of the pitches that Mumbai were playing on. I do think it wasn't a batting leg of the tour for Mumbai in Chennai, and so he was always going to be slightly kind of suffering at that. But at the same time, he did look slightly out of nip by the end of the tournament. Just as Mumbai's kind of form was improving, he was looking like he was dropping off. And given the way that they handled Kishan, it's not out of the question that they would have dropped him. So if he'd have continued to be kind of relatively profligate, then you never know. But I do think that he didn't look that bad. It was just it's a weird tournament. It's more broad for all the discussion that what we are actually having. Is I think it is hard and quite harsh to judge players on what's happened in the last seven games. It's harsh to judge players in 7-game run anytime. But given what's going on, given it's the bubble, given all the context in India, I think to an extent we're all going to have to kind of slightly park our judgments over what's happened. I know that slightly undermines what we're saying, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, and as you said, those are critical circumstances, what those players deal with in terms of bubble life and just the entire situation. So as you mentioned, and players are able to produce good results, we really must credit them. Matt, finally from you had David Warner, 193 runs, and Jasprit Bumrah, 6 wickets, who sorry, it's interesting to see Jasprit Bumrah and how teams now play him. It's more like they're now just playing him out, trying to not give him wickets. David Warner, talk to me about that one.
Yeah, the ball, it didn't really happen for him, did it? I think, Sunrisers playing on those tough pitches to start with in Chennai and Delhi wouldn't necessarily have helped, but he just didn't really sort of click into gear at any point, as discussed. And I think probably would have spent most of the rest of the tournament doing 12-man duties as well. So not my finest shout, that one. Bumrah, as you say, really interesting that his economy rate across the comp was just a shade over 7. And that's including the fact that he took 1 for 56 in his 4 overs against Chennai in that sort of high-scoring thriller in their last game. So that probably reminds you of just how good his start to the tournament was. Maybe not the best pick in terms of top wicket takers because of the fact that teams are now playing him almost like they play Rashid Khan a lot of the time, where you are, if Bumrah takes 1 for 20 in 4 overs against you, that's a good result as a batting team. If you can hit 2 boundaries off in those 4 overs, fine, take it. But yeah, who knows what would have happened for the rest of the comp after that 1 for 56 against Chennai in his last game, because would that have changed that intent? Would teams have started trying to attack him more? Would people think that they've got something on him? Who knows? But yeah, I certainly don't think the fact that he wasn't wearing the purple cap at halfway means that we should sort of doubt his ability by any means, because I think he was still absolutely vital to the success that Mumbai did have.
Yeah, definitely. My predictions in this case were not as close as you guys. I'll start with the worst. My bowler was Anurag Narke, who up to now hasn't played a single game for the Delhi Capitals. I think it's a big surprise. I thought he should have been in, given 22 wickets last season, just how lethal he is. Poor fella, making him come all the way from South Africa, can't even get a game. Just so sad. But also, my batsman, 250 runs, Rohit Sharma. Again, another year where I just keep saying that Rohit Sharma is just the guy. And he's began to show it in the last couple of games where the ball coming onto the bat a lot nicer and the pitches are much better. But still, not that player that we're used to seeing 4 or 5 years ago. So I'll say I'm pretty far off. I don't think Rohit Sharma would have won that. And I definitely don't think starting this late, Anurag Narke, if he even could get in the team, would have won that. Guys, Matt, Ben, Tymal, thank you so much for coming on to the show. I really hope that the IPL will resume soon and we can come back and decide on if we want to keep our predictions the same or if we want to change them. There is a big World T20 coming up later in the year that I'm sure we're going to be engaging with you guys on as well. It was fantastic. Great to have this review show, and thank you so much.